Team, thank you so much. What a great time of worship. Can we show appreciation to them? All right, everybody awake? Enough coffee this morning so far? Enough bacon so far? That was like one of the best pieces of bacon I think I've ever had. I'm going to have to come back just for that, for sure. But yeah, it's been a great weekend so far. Hopefully you're enjoying it despite the rain today. A couple of things I want to share just as encouragement. You realize, you know God's at work when you hear stories like this. We have two couples that aren't even supposed to be here this weekend who showed up. One couple was supposed to be here, next weekend? And you came. Where are you guys? Somewhere around. They're supposed to be next weekend, but they came this week. Another couple is supposed to be at a completely different conference and came here instead. And so we met them last night, and that was really cool. We're like, yeah, God has a reason for you to be at this conference, right? Really cool. And then we do have our 52-year couple here wearing their Forest Springs sweatshirts. And they came to me this morning and said, Scott, we not only are still wearing our wedding rings, but we're wearing our 50th anniversary rings. Now, that's pretty impressive. Now, I got to say that I am writing some medical exemptions for some of you with your wedding rings, because we had at least one couple came up and they said, we have tattoos on our fingers. There they are. Tattoos, because he works with machinery and doesn't want to lose a finger. So I had to give an exemption, written exemption for him and for them. Tattoos are okay. That works out pretty good. Real quick story, though. There's a story about a couple in the Midwest. They were coming up on their 20th wedding anniversary, and the husband, wanting to be a good husband, planned a trip because it was freezing cold. It was February. It was like they had a Valentine's wedding, and the Midwest out here, it's freezing cold in February. So they decided they're going south, right? So he booked a hotel and flights. What he didn't realize, he didn't, communicate well with his wife at the beginning. He didn't realize his wife couldn't go on the same flight as him. She had a work commitment, and so she had to fly down the next morning. So he flies down to Florida, South Florida, right? And gets down there and says, you know what, I'm going to be a good husband. I'm going to take out my laptop, and I'm just going to let my wife know that I arrived safely. So he decided he was going to email her, and as he's typing his email, he also remembered, oh my goodness, my wife changed her email address, and I want to send it to her work address, but I think I got it. So he typed in the email address and sent it, and it didn't get kicked back. So he figured, okay, it got to her. And unfortunately, he was off by like one letter. Is that a problem, by the way, if you're sending an email? You know it is. And instead of the email going to his wife in Chicago, it ended up going to an elderly pastor's wife in Houston, Texas, who had just lost her husband that week. And she and her family had just gotten back from the funeral, and she gets home, and all of her family's, all there. They're getting ready to have a little lunch or something, and she opens up her computer, and she screams and faints onto the floor. And her son and her daughter, they're picking her up and getting her back up in her seat, and they're trying to figure out, Mom, what's the matter? What's wrong? And all she could do was point to the computer screen. Remember, she had just lost her husband. And she read this message. Dearest wife, I just got checked in. Everything is ready for your arrival tomorrow. P.S. Sure is hot down here. So gentlemen, just so you were aware, the details matter. The details matter. Now, my wife's going to review a little bit, but before that, in the back is our merch table. And Ash, what do we got back there? We got, of course, we got our book, which, by the way, we need to give a shout out.
Yes, to Leslie. Last night, Leslie read our entire book. She stayed up till 2 in the morning and
Let's
read
give it up for Leslie.
Our entire book. Yes.
She's a camper of the week.
So we've got T-shirts, we've got tumblers, journals, books, and all of that. We are a nonprofit ministry, so all those proceeds go to the ministry that we do. We don't charge our couples. We work with a lot of couples in the city, and we don't charge. And so that goes to that ministry. So we would love it if you would want to purchase anything, and then even giving a book to like your future, anybody who's getting engaged or married, it's a great gift for them. So let's do some review. 7 rocks, solid rocks that we talked about last night. Number 1, anybody? Relationship with the Creator,
of
first
marriage.
thing. Number 2, commitment. Commitment is so important. Number 3, anybody? Mutual submission. Number 4, husbands, what's your role? Leader. What's your responsibility?
Love.
Love. Ladies, what's your role? Helper. What's your responsibility? Respect. Very good. All right, so today we are going to start with the rolling rocks. Rolling rocks.
But before
First.
that, just a quick little video that's going to
Yep.
help some of the communication. And did any of you do your homework last night? Eye to eye, knee to knee? Oh, okay.
Good.
All right. Well, we had a couple that we're trying to work that out. Let's take a look and see how they did.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head. And it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just.
Don't.
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking
All right.
till I can go on? We can work it out. We can work it out.
All right. How did that go, right? That's what some of you were dealing with last night, the nail in your husband's head, right? Okay. So today we're going to be talking about session 2, rolling rocks. These are the neutral areas, things that most couples are going to have to deal with in their marriage. Not right or wrong, but how you deal with them can make or break your marriage. Hopefully you all got a set of notes and you'll be ready to follow along. If you missed any notes from last night, come see us. We'll make sure you fill in any blanks because I know some of you are note takers and you have to have every blank filled.
Does
All right,
anybody need notes?
everybody got notes? Anybody? Oh,
Oh.
couple needs notes, so
here.
we need some help there. Okay, they'll get you some notes. All right, so the first rolling rock that almost every marriage has to deal with right at the beginning, if not before you're even married, is the issue of in-laws. In-laws. We were talking with a couple about that actually this morning. And yeah, in-laws, you know, like some of you would like to cut off the branch that some of your in-laws are sitting on, like the picture, right? Like you didn't realize when you married this person, like you were going to inherit all these other family members. Like when I married Lisa, I added 2 brother-in-laws, a sister-in-law, obviously parent-in-laws, you know, a father-in-law, mother-in-law, and other parts of her family, her crazy family. And then she married into my family, which meant a brother-in-law, 3 sisters-in-law, all their spouses, you know, all the nephews and nieces and crazy people in my family as well. Genesis chapter 2 that we read last night said that this is why a man leaves his father and mother and then is united to his wife and they become one flesh, right? The problem with the idea of becoming one is that there's a lot of things that can keep us from truly being one and truly finding that oneness in marriage. And one of the things can be relationships with in-laws. And some of you have great in-laws. Some of you love your mother-in-law. and love your father-in-law. And some of you, again, would like to cut them out of your family tree, right? They're driving you crazy, right? It's a difficult transition. Understand it's a difficult transition for you as a young couple, and older couples, it's a difficult transition for you as well. Receiving and accepting your daughter-in-law, your son-in-law as they are, and making sure that you're not, pushing them away. And how that relationship works with your in-laws is so important. It can be a rolling rock. It can be a beautiful thing, or it can destroy your marriage. And so what we share is that you cannot cleave or become united as a husband and wife if you don't leave. This is why a man and a woman leave their father and mother. So how do you need to leave? We want to suggest to you 5 ways that you need to leave. And one is physically, which means move out. Some couples and some parents are tempted to say, just come live with us. We've got plenty of room at our house. You can save money for your own house, right? And just come with us. But unfortunately, the reason that most couples do that, again, is financial. And finances we're going to talk about next, but you cannot let finances be the sole determining factor in where you're going to live. In fact, what we find is young couples who live with their parents, it stunts their growth. Yeah. They have a hard time being able to really cleave. My wife often will say, what?
Yeah, and also, like what we have noticed is with couples that live with their parents, especially if the couple lives with the wife's parents, the father is the head of that home. And the young husband never gets to be the head of his home because he's in his father-in-law's home. And so that's really stunting to the brand new husband, where he cannot take that place as leader of his home.
Yeah, so it's important, we think, to move out and to have your own physical address. You are now a new family. Yeah. It's really important. The second way we need to leave is
geographically. Now, the reason why we say this, it is so healthy even for your kids to fly the nest, go somewhere safe, to grow up a little bit, right, apart from mom and dad. And we were just so blessed with, Ashley, she was often on her own. Even in high school, she would go down to camps all summer. In college, she was away from home in college pretty much her whole college year, all 4 years. Her 4th year, she was here the whole time. And then she moved to Minnesota for 3 years. So she was well established as a young individual person and doing everything on her own, very competent, very, very much a leader in her own right. And then when she moved back to the area, she did move in with us, but she was a completely functional adult. And we were able to establish a beautiful friendship with her. Instead of that parent-child thing, switched beautifully into a beautiful friendship. And so we didn't tell her what to do, but she asked our advice. And so that was a beautiful thing. Now, our son was not quite as easy, so we kind of had to kick him out a little bit and say, you need to get out on your own, because for him, it was just boys are different, and it was just a different story for him. But boy, and it was scary. It was scary kicking him out and saying, you need to go. You need to learn on your own. Now, I made sure by the time he left our house, he could do his laundry, he could cook. Both of my kids had to cook a roast chicken and a chuck roast, 2 foundational meals. And he knew how to clean everything. He knew how to clean the bathroom, fully take care of himself, but he needed to grow up. And so he came to Trailhead for the whole year, like I said, and it just changed his life. And it was a beautiful thing. But yeah, geographically, they need to get out so that they can't come back constantly. Mom, Dad. They need to, look, you do your job, then they need to fly the nest and grow up on their own.
So when possible, the geography is important. When Lisa and I got married, my parents were about 35 minutes away from us in New Jersey. We were on the Pennsylvania side of the Delaware River. And her parents were about 2.5 hours in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And it was just enough distance for us, that we were able to see them when we wanted to, have them come down for a weekend. But we felt like we had our own physical address and home. And that's so important geographically. Another way that we need to leave is financially. Don't depend on your parents financially when you get married. And that's hard for young couples. And I got to tell you, it's hard for the parents not to want to help out the kids, right? Because they're struggling. And we're going to share a little bit of our story financially, where we started with hardly anything. And we were living paycheck to paycheck. And part of our struggle is what really God used to strengthen us in our relationship, in our marriage. And so, parents, I know that you want to help, but don't help out so much that your kids depend on you financially. They have to learn the importance of trusting God and knowing that their struggle is what's going to help develop character in their life. Fourth way
is emotionally. And this is harder for girls than boys on a general rule. But we know of some girls in our youth ministry who were so attached to their moms when they got married. Anytime there's an issue, she'd go to mom. She'd go to mom every time. And her husband was not her first place to go to, and that's not good. So we had to help her cut those apron strings from her mom, and the mom to cut the apron strings from her, so that her and her husband could develop. And actually what happened is his job got transferred and they moved out of state. It was the absolute best thing that could have happened to them. And then they grew up together became one unit as a husband and wife. And then when they moved back to the area, they were a completely different couple. But yeah, so emotionally, you got to make those ties so that your husband, your wife is your first go-to, not mom and dad.
It's so important to have boundaries. We're dealing with so many couples, and I lead so many weddings, actually, as a pastor, that one of the things we say, what God has joined together, let no one what? Separate. And what we have found is, besides maybe some single friends that kind of can pull a new husband away from his bride, or some ladies, friends that can pull the bride away from her husband, the biggest one pulling their kids away from each other are their parents. A mom who's so emotionally attached to her daughter, or a dad that's so emotionally attached and wanting to do more and help, and going over the boundary line. And sometimes you have to sit down as a young couple and say, what are the boundaries? What's going to be healthy for us about how often we see our parents? And unfortunately, sometimes there are toxic relationships where you have to really be very careful about how much time you spend. And that's hard. That's hard. But those are important conversations when you are trying to leave and cleave in your marriage. The last one that we want to share with you is that you also, this isn't so much about leaving. Let's move this. There we go. It's about owning your faith as a couple. Now, how many of you had believing parents growing up? Okay, which is such a blessing to have a mom and dad that have faith in Jesus and want to pass down that faith to you. It can be an incredible blessing. But what's so important is that even if you made a childhood decision for Jesus, right, that there's a point in your life. For me, it was when I was 19 and I was away at college, away from my parents, actually in Ohio. And I had to do some wrestling with God. And I knew I had put my faith in Jesus as my Savior. But I got to tell you, I hadn't really accepted him as my Lord, as leader and commander and master of my life. And it was when I was 19 that I was really wrestling with God. And the faith that I was raised with was no longer just on the coattails of my parents, but it was my faith. It was what I believe. And I had that experience with Christ, that I knew that he was my leader.
Especially because your dad was a pastor.
Exactly.
So that, and of course, we've been a pastor since we got married, so our kids were pastors' kids. And so when our kids got to the age, when they graduated from high school, we told them, look, go find a church. You do not have to stay at the church that we're at. You need to go find your own identity, find a church that you can serve at and just be a part of. And that's what they did. In fact, so then we would go to their church and they'd like, oh, this is, instead of, oh, you're Scott and Lisa's kid, you're Pastor Scott and Lisa's child, they're like, oh, you're Josiah's parents, you're Ashley's parents, right? And so they were able to own their own identity, their faith, and serve and jump in a ministry. And it's been a beautiful thing. Not that they can't stay, but for us as pastors, we really wanted to set our kids free and not And because we've seen other pastors where like they had to hold on tight, like you got to stay a part of our ministry, you got to serve with us as a family. And we just don't feel that way. We feel like you need to seek God, be free, and let God grow you where you need, apart from us, so that you can, blossom.
So important to release your kids, and you know what? They're God's kids, right? Many of us dedicated our children to the Lord, when they were babies at church or wherever, and said, God, these are your kids. We want to entrust them to you. We want them to be able to get out of the nest and be able to be all that you want them to be. And you can confirm with Tim and Ashley in the back, but we feel like we've done a pretty good job of letting them, be who God wants them to be and develop, like Lisa talked about earlier, a friendship with our kids. We don't try to give our kids advice. They know that we're here. Yeah. They know that we love them. There are times we have to bite our lip with some of our, kids at times as adults. But you know what? By just really letting them know how much we unconditionally love and support them, we've been able to have some amazing conversations. Yeah. And then we're able to offer some advice as it's appropriate. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay, so how then does this work? I don't know if you realize this, but as adults and as adult couples, that we are always to continue, the scriptures teach, to honor our parents, but we are no longer commanded to obey. And again, there are some parents that want to continue to parent you into adulthood and tell you what to do and control, and it's just not a healthy thing. Yeah. So we want to take a little sidebar on this issue of caring for aging parents.
Yeah, so 1 Timothy 5:4-8 says, "But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." And so this is a pretty amazing passage, because it's God cares about us caring for our families. And so Scott and I, we were married 10 years on our own with our kids and very well established and had a good, solid marriage when Scott's dad, actually Scott's mom, had a surgery and almost died. And so he's the baby of 5 years removed from the next oldest sibling. And so all the 5 kids started talking, what are we going to do? What are you going to do with Dad? What happens if Mom dies? Scott and I were the only ones that prayed and said we would take care of him. The other 4 were making well over 6 digits and could afford it, but none of them said that they would do it. We were the only ones making a youth pastor's salary. We could afford a garage. That's what we could afford. We were living in the church parsonage, but we prayed and said, God, we're ready. If it be your will, we would be honored to take care of our parents. And so what happened was God opened the door, gave us a house that we, like I said, was way above and beyond we could ever think or ask, provided a house for us to care for Scott's parents. They were the first ones. So we had Pop-Up and Grammy, Herb and Floss, that's Scott's parents, came to live with us. We had Herb for 17 years. We had Floss for 14. And then my mom died in 2009 of ovarian cancer. And we said, okay, what's one more? We got 2, let's take one. So my dad moved in with us. So we had 3 80-year-olds, plus our 3 kids, with our oldest being special needs and full care. But each of them had their own individual issues. So Scott's dad had dementia that took over his body and his mind, complete dementia. Scott's mom was actually the first one to pass. She, once my mom passed away, and then we had the 3, Scott's mom passed from kidney failure, and she had a cancerous tumor. And then we had the boys, my dad and Scott's dad, which are complete opposite personalities. Scott's dad's the prim and proper preacher. My dad grew up on the streets of Puerto Rico. And so my dad had no filter, but he was very funny, I have to say. But here's my dad and Scott's dad coming together. My dad had a thick Spanish accent, and then Scott's dad lost his hearing. And it was hilarious because I would come out and they'd be sitting at the table, and I'd be like, and they'd just be staring at each other, smiling. my dad would talk, and his dad had no idea what my dad was saying. It was so funny. But then and my dad had diabetes, and over the years we had him for 6 years. He lost both legs to diabetes. His first leg, we went through 5 surgeries trying to save that one, 7 surgeries trying to save the other one. And so at 86, he walked on 2 prosthetic legs, which is quite a feat. He was a survivor. But so, you name it, we dealt with it. And so it's like people say, how do you do it? How do you do it? I mean, one time I was in the hospital with my dad. That was my life, hospitals. For the 10 years, it was hospital surgeries between his dad, my dad, Lindsay, his mom. That was my life. And so we were in the hospital, and you know how when you first get checked in, they ask you 100 questions. All these questions. And who do you live with? Who's in your house? Blah, 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 blah. And so I'm answering all the questions, of course, and the nurse looks at me and she goes, really? I could never tell by your face. And I'm like, my face? What's wrong with my face? She goes, I can't see any stress on your face. I said, oh. I said, honey, I give that to the Lord. I said, there's no way I can handle all that. And so it was a chance to witness to her, honestly. But yeah, I mean, God is a rock. You know those 7 solid rocks that we talked about last night? The relationship with the Creator. God is our rock. I mean, and we work together as a team. Both of us pulled together and said, we're going to do this together. That's the only way we could survive it. But man, what a journey it was caring for our parents.
So in-laws, what an incredible rolling rock. And so hopefully you as a couple are managing those in-law relationships well. Second rolling rock that all of us have to deal with as couples is handling finances together. And as I mentioned, Lisa and I started out pretty much with nothing. We graduated from Bible college. We were Christian school teachers when we started out back in the late 1980s. I was raking in about $9,500 annual salary. She was bringing in about $9,000, and together we were making just enough to survive barely. And but I got to tell you, those years we would not trade them in for anything.
And our parents did not help us.
No, not too much. And so finances, of course, is what's called the number one battlefield in marriage. And but it can also be the number one opportunity in marriage. The scriptures say that where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And of course, men and women, we're very different in how we approach money. It can cause a lot of stress and anxiety, especially when things are tight. 7 out of 10 couples say that they disagree about financial issues. It's number one cause of divorce in North America. It's 57% of couples who have gotten divorced say that financial disputes was the number one issue that led to their divorce. So again, it's the number one battlefield, but it can also be the number one opportunity, as Larry Burkett used to always say. It can actually bring unity to your marriage when you learn to handle finances as a team and agree on your values. Because when you agree on your finances, you're agreeing on your values, what's important to you. And when we share with our couples in pre-marriage coaching, we share with them these 6 key principles that are in your notes. Number one is, especially from a Christian perspective, a godly, biblical perspective, it all belongs to God. And in the terms that we use in church, it's called stewardship, right? That we are not the owners of everything that we have, including our finances, but God is the owner. We are just the stewards. We are just the caretakers of what God has blessed us with. And when we have that mindset, it becomes much easier to realize, like, my goodness, He's provided everything. Every good and perfect gift, it says in James, comes from the Father of lights, with whom there's no changing. And we can depend on Him and know that whatever we have, it all belongs to Him. What's also important, number 2, when it comes to finances, as we've mentioned, is you have to handle them as a team. As a team. So when Lisa and I got married, and we recommend this to all of our couples, is to join your accounts. Now, I got to tell you that if there are trust issues in your relationship, that may have to be delayed. If somebody's really been irresponsible, if somebody's got an addiction, that's draining money, that's a problem. And that should hopefully be dealt with before you get married, right? The addiction. I won't marry somebody if somebody's in active addiction. And we barely are able to really coach or counsel couples until that addiction is cared for first. We want to talk about a jagged rock. That will be tomorrow or tonight later on. But handling finances as a team. So we had joint accounts. We tried to figure out, okay, so who's going to be the one overseeing paying the bills? You know, we'll talk through the budget together or expenditures. So Lisa started out, and then I got frustrated because I thought, you know, she's a very organized person. But I'm also very financially minded. And so we ended up having to do a little bit of a switch. And I kind of took it over, and we haven't looked back, right?
Yeah, and you actually had such a passion for it. I'm like, take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he loves finances.
Yeah.
And
So
he's so
joint
good at it.
accounts, so important. And one of my roles, I didn't share with this earlier, but I'm also a planning counselor and staff minister for a network of funeral homes in the Philadelphia area. And so I lead a lot of services for families, and I do a lot of follow-ups for families. And I can't tell you how many couples someone passed, and they didn't have all their accounts with both names on all their accounts. A vehicle without both names, a house without both names. And somebody passes, then that couple has to go through probate, right? And set up an estate administration account, whereas if your names are both jointly on all your accounts and finances, there's not an issue, right? It all goes to the person, God forbid one of you passes. So there's practical reasons to join those accounts, and married filing jointly for your taxes, and budgeting together, and of course also working towards an emergency fund. How many of you have heard of Dave Ramsey? Okay, followed Financial Peace University. We use that in our pre-marriage coaching. He's excellent, and he talks about the emergency fund, which is so important. Another thing we teach is the principle called 10-10-80. How many of you have heard of that? A few of you. 10-10-80, what does that mean? It means you are giving 10% of your income away. You might call that the tithe if you were raised in the church. We believe that's just a starting point. Old Testament, bring all the tithes into the storehouse. So we believe the storehouse is the church, the local church that hopefully you're a part of. That's the storehouse. And Jesus kind of in the New Testament, you know, talking to the Pharisees says, you know, this you should have also done, referring back to the tithes, validating that tithes is still for today. Some of you may disagree with that. That's fine. You know, continue to research it and understand that the Holy Spirit will guide you. But we believe that our first 10% is going back to the kingdom through the local church. And then we're able to give actually beyond that to different missionaries. So one of the missionary couples we support here at Forest Springs, as well as other missionaries and organizations that we believe in on top of our regular tithe. But giving at least 10%, saving 10%, which is also a biblical concept, and then learning to live on the 80%. And especially for young couples, when you're starting out, if you can follow that formula, let's give 10% away, let's save 10% of our income, and then let's live and learn to live off the 80%, it will serve you well. What's happened in our life is as God has blessed us more over time, we've been able to give more than 10%, we've been able to save more than 10%, and we've learned to live off of even a lesser percentage. And what a beautiful thing to be able to give more and to be able to save more. It's just a beautiful thing. So that's the 10-10-80 principle.
And I think a lot of that for us, one of our very first lessons when we were making nothing is to learn to be content. God wanted to teach us that lesson, to learn contentment. There's a verse that 1 Timothy 6:6 says, godliness with contentment is great gain. And so I remember our very first apartment that we lived in, the brown shag carpet about this long. So it's the same color as the cockroaches, so you really couldn't see, and the shag carpet kind of moved, so you didn't know if it was the carpet or the cockroaches until they crawled across your feet, and then they would come and bomb the apartment, and then they would go to the neighbors, and then 3 months later they would come back. And we were like, we got to get out of this place, and we were like so frustrated, and so we were looking we were looking for weeks for another place to live, and nothing. And we prayed and said, okay, God gave us this verse. Godliness with contentment is great gain. So we were like, okay, God, maybe you're trying to teach us a lesson. So we prayed and said, Lord, help us to be content. Maybe there's somebody in this apartment complex that we need to witness to, reach out to. Okay, so we gave it to the Lord, and I kid you not, the very next day we get this call from a Christian couple that had a house where the main floor and the basement was open for rent. And it was cheaper than this apartment we were living in. And it had all kinds of really cool things, like a laundry chute and all these really cool things. And yeah, that opened up the next day as soon as we prayed and said, okay, God, we will be content. So the other thing, we learned to pray first. Pray first. And God, absolutely, we needed to learn that lesson to pray and not go back to the thing where don't ask your parents, pray. God said, I will provide for you. I want you to learn to rest on me. And I tell you, we were making so little money that Scott needed a coat, a winter coat. We couldn't even afford a coat. And so we were praying, and one night he had just got the youth pastor position. So you were on the way to a meeting.
Yeah, so I'm on my way to a meeting to church, and it was dusk, right? It's just starting to get dark, and I'm driving on this road, and it looked like there was a dead animal in the middle of the road. So I kind of started to try to avoid it a little bit, but I went by, I looked over, and it looked like a coat. So I kept driving, and all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit says, Scott, turn around and go back. And I'm like, Lord, that can't be you. There's no way I'm going back to do what I think you're asking me to do. So I just kept driving. And all of a sudden, it's like the Holy Spirit, that small, quiet voice, Scott, turn around and go back. Trust me. I'm like, Lord, really? Really? And so I got off on the shoulder. I did a U-turn. I went back. I pulled off on the other shoulder right by the lump in the middle of the road. And I made sure I looked both ways so no one would see what I was about to do. And I ran out into the middle of the road. I grabbed the coat, ran back to my car, opened the back door, threw it in, got back in the driver's seat, and went to my meeting at church. And then I drove home. And I almost forgot about it, and I got back to the apartment, and I'm like, oh, man, I got something in the back seat, and I brought it out, and it was still dark out now, pitch black. Brought it into the apartment, looked at it in the light, and it was a beautiful London fog winter coat.
Winter coat.
And it looked like there was barely a scratch on it or dirt on it. And we did dry clean it.
And it fit him.
We did dry clean it, ladies.
Perfectly.
And it fit me perfectly,
Yeah.
and I wore it for years. It was like God was saying, oh, you need a winter coat, son. Bloop. Just drop it in the middle of the road for you. So, praying first, trusting God.
Yeah.
We had to learn that a lot in the early
what
years.
was so cool is during those years, I mean, we could tell you story after story after story of needs that we had, and we prayed, and God provided like that. I mean, out of nowhere. Just one more quick story. I mean, there's so many stories, but we had the girls. We were in the parsonage church, right beside the church, and so Lindsay and Ashley were like twins for quite some time because Lindsay was so tiny. And they both needed beds. They're ready to get out of their cribs. And we couldn't even afford beds, like single beds for the girls. The other thing was, this is when the phone was still attached to the wall with a cord. Remember those days? And cordless phones just came out. So everybody had a cordless phone, or they were getting them. Of course, some of their wires were crossing and all kinds of things like that. But in ministry, we get calls all the time. And I could not be attached to a wall with two toddlers running around. And so I actually had a terrible attitude, and I started complaining. I'm like, I need to get a part-time job. We're not making enough money. We need beds, and we need a cordless phone, and blah, 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 blah. And so this weekend, Scott was going on he was the youth pastor, and he was taking the kids on a ski trip. So he's driving the bus, and one of the parents who has two teenage girls was in the well of the bus talking to him on the way to the ski trip. So they have this conversation.
And basically says, oh, by the way, Scott, do you know anybody that could use 2 twin beds? My girls want bigger beds now. They've outgrown them. I'm like, yeah, that would be great. He brought them over the next day on Sunday. Yeah. I helped him carry up the mattresses. We're like, oh, my gosh, this is just amazing.
After I complained.
Yeah.
That God
And then after we
me.
get the beds up there set up for the girls, he's like, oh, I forgot something. There's something in my truck for you. And he goes back down, brings up this cardboard box. Inside, a cordless phone. Says, I didn't know if you could use this, but my girls both had cordless phones and they were
Crossing the line.
crossing the line. So we just want to,
So
we didn't
I'm-
even know that we needed that too. So God
But
provides.
it's humbled me so much. I felt so bad that in spite of my terrible attitude, God said, all right, I'm going to take care of you, girl, and your attitude too. So since then, I'm like, we just said, oh man, we just pray. We talk to the Lord and we watch him work in miraculous ways. I mean, out of nowhere, things happened and God provided. So when you have money, you don't tend to pray. You just say, oh, let's just go out and get it. We have the money. Or, mom and dad will buy it or whatever. But no, God wanted to teach us something so deep and so special about him that has carried us through our ministry like you have no idea. It's just been a beautiful, valuable lesson, and you want your kids to learn that, to depend on God.
We could tell you so many stories, and some of you have stories like that as well. We've got to move. We're running late on time.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. But last principle is to avoid debt as best you can. When we teach couples on this area, really, really important. We have them lay out their finances with us before their wedding so that we can kind of talk to them. Let's project a budget. Let's figure this out.
Yeah.
But avoiding debt can be really, really difficult, especially when we have some couples with hundreds of thousands of dollars of school debt.
Yeah.
We had one couple with $300,000 of school debt. It was a mortgage payment they basically were in.
$3,000
Worst
a month,
debt,
yeah.
obviously, is what? Credit card debt. Why? Because it's the highest interest rate. They want you to pay the minimum, balance so that you have, 17 to 26% interest rate on money carrying. Or my dad always taught me, son, if you don't have the money in the bank, do not put it in on the credit card. You have to pay off the entire balance at the end of each month. Okay, don't let anything roll over. That's how they get you. And so credit card debt obviously is the worst kind of debt. Car debt, car loans, sometimes you need to, I realize. School debt, and mortgages are probably obviously the best kind of debt. Dave Ramsey would say there's no good debt, but I think that mortgages are obviously a good debt in the sense you're building up equity with every payment. You're basically getting more and more ownership of the house that you purchase. And so, but just making sure you don't over mortgage, meaning you take out a mortgage for this amount when you really should be buying less of a house to start out, right? So avoiding debt, really important. Now, we're going to go to the third rolling rock, and Tim Hawkins is going to help us kind of introduce this rock.
But if there's one message out there, I don't know, I think it's for the fathers out there. If any of you guys are married and your wife stays home with the kids all day, when you get home from work, she needs a break. She just needs to go somewhere. Yeah, that's the truth. I've been married 15 years. I learned that the hard way. Came in from a 3-day trip. I walk in the door and my wife's just standing there waiting for me. Honey, I'm home. Yeah, I heard you pulling up. Can I have a hug? What's the problem? You need to take the kids somewhere. And you need to do it now. Okay. Where do you want me to take them? I don't give a rip where you take them. Just get out of here. Okay, we're gonna leave. Let's get in the car. She's here. Get in the car! We're gonna go. We'll be back at June. So I get my kids in the car, man, and we're just sitting there. I didn't know where to go. We're just, okay. I took them to Home Depot. I didn't know what to do. That's where guys find peace, at the Home Depot. Just look at hammers for a while, That was not the right choice that particular day. Folks, you can't let your kids run off at the Home Depot. Because I don't know, you have not lived your life till you turn the corner at a Home Depot and see your youngest son using a display toilet. I'm just getting real here. There's a Kodak moment for you right there. Any of you parents got an answer for that little quandary? James Dobson, why don't you focus on my family for a while? Mr. Smarty Pants. And he's going to town, he don't care, the manager's looking right at me. I'm like, hey. Yeah, that's my boy. Should be done in a minute here. Y'all take Visa. Okay, good, that's good. Just what Daddy wanted, a turquoise toilet. And why don't you just throw a microwave on top of that bad boy? We'll call it even. Make it a package deal.
All right, you got to love Tim Hawkins. Some of you have heard of him before. He's amazing. Raising children, rolling rock, absolutely in marriage. And we know that not all couples can physically produce children. We meet a lot of couples, unfortunately, that can't, but who have adopted or just have decided not to have kids, and that's just part of what God has for them. And so, but for many of us, raising children is a part of marriage. And it says in Proverbs 20, verse 7, that the righteous lead blameless lives. Blessed are their children after them. You live a righteous life, a godly life. It impacts your children after you and your grandchildren and their kids. Proverbs 22:6 says, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. We've learned that that's a principle more than it is a promise. Because we've met many godly parents who've had kids that have gone way off the rails. Some of you may have been in that situation as well. We cannot control our kids. We cannot control sometimes the outcomes of where our kids are going to go, where they're going to head in life. But we have the responsibility of raising children as a husband and wife. How does that impact marriage? Well, Lisa's going to...
So the first thing is we need to parent as a team. This is absolutely 1,000% a team effort. And we have met so many families where the father is not involved in the parenting. In fact, we just met a couple in the past couple weeks where the mom does everything and the husband just comes home, and it's kind of that traditional mindset where he comes home, kicks his feet up, eats his dinner, and he relaxes, but he's not involved in the kids. But it's been very interesting because she started reading our book and she's been asking us some questions, and things are shifting already, and she's already seeing a shift in her husband. And just 2 nights ago, he instead of going up to his room and doing his thing, he stayed down with the family. They have 5 kids. And so parenting is a team effort. And for us, absolutely, with our special needs child, for sure, we needed to parent as a team. But having 3 kids, 3 completely different, unique kids, you can't do it by yourself. You weren't meant to do it by yourself. And fathers, you have something so significant that God put inside of you for your kids that is very different than a mom. That is very different, and to nurture and raise your kids, that does something that far beyond what you can even imagine. It's super valuable. Yeah. So also, developing a child-centered marriage. This is not another thing that can happen, and this can be more on the mom. What we see is that the child becomes so important to the mom that she starts to forget about her husband and his needs. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. And so we have a little bit of information in our book, some things of how to know.
Yeah, so a child-centered marriage, as we see up on the screen, is a marriage where the children dominate the focus, right? It's not that they're not supposed to be an important part of the family, obviously, but they dominate the focus, the direction, and the energies of the home in an unhealthy way. Key word there is unhealthy. In our book on page 125, we share some ways that you can know, or questions that you can ask to know whether or not you have a child-centered marriage. Here's one. Do you tend to put your children's desires and wishes ahead of your spouse's needs? Number 2, do you say yes to your children even when your spouse disagrees? You may have a child-centered marriage. Number 3, do you allow your children to disrespect their mother or father? Should never happen. Number 4, are you resistant to getting away for some quality time with your spouse because you can't leave your children. We have some couples that for years they've never been away for even an overnight without their kids. We couldn't wait to get our kids with our parents or whoever would watch them so that we could get away. Number 6, do you feel like your communication with your spouse is always about the kids and never about each other? Yeah. Do you spend money that you don't have to give your kids what they want? We know that sometimes this is fueled by disappointment from what you didn't get when you were growing up as a child. And number 7, do you feel like there's a loss of physical intimacy due to the attention that you and your spouse give to the priorities of your children? Those are just some questions that you can ask that will help you know, do we have a child-centered marriage? Some keys as parents is that you have to make sure that you keep putting a log on the fire of your relationship. And that means quality time. That means making sure that you are not neglecting the communication that you need as a husband and wife.
Number 2, couch time. We called it couch time when our kids were little. When Daddy came in the door, what we would do is sit down right away. He and I would connect. We'd say to the kids, go to the playroom, read a book, whatever. But Mom and Dad have to talk and connect. And this is about 15, 20 minutes, like how was your day? What's going on? How are you doing? Whatever. You need to just connect first. And then, so the kids start to see that marriage is valuable, that Mom and Dad need to talk, and you come together as one unit. And it is just a beautiful thing for, not for just your marriage, but for your kids, and to emulate that for them to see.
And of course, don't neglect what we call nookie time. Nookie time. I don't know what you call making love in your relationship, but that's our little pet word. But we got to make sure that we do not neglect each other in that way. That physical intimacy is so important. And sometimes when the kids come, we know, ladies, that, you know, your bodies are going through major changes. You just had a baby, and it takes time to recover and all of that. But when your kids are growing up, you just can't wait till your kids are 18 before, you have sex with your husband again, all right? They'll be out of the house soon, honey. But no, for a healthy marriage, you have to make sure that stays a priority. And husbands, you need to make sure you give your wife time and make sure that you're not neglecting the other parts of the marriage.
We use Mark Gunger's stuff for this area. He's really good. If any of you have heard of him, look him up, and it's phenomenal. He does a great job.
Laughing Your Way to a Better Marriage.
Yeah.
It's classic. He's been out now for several years, but we use a lot of his videos to help us with that as well. Now, the greatest gift that you can give your children, we believe,
is a healthy
marriage. I'm going to tell you, there's no amount of money, no college fund, no game system, no Disney vacation that can make up for an unhealthy or toxic or dissolved marriage.
Yeah.
And so making sure that when you have young kids that this relationship is a priority is so important to the health of your kids. It's the greatest gift that you can give your kids. And
number 3, what we really try to do is promote fun, laughter, and memories in our home. So Proverbs 17:22 says, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. And here's just a couple of pictures of like what we try to do with our kids. We are game players, so Friday night is game night with the popcorn, homemade popcorn. So we love playing games. It's such a bonding, fun experience with our family. We love it. Our family vacation spot, for over 50 years, his family's been going. We've been going to New Hampshire, and so now it went from him to we got married to our kids. And now our grandkids are experiencing vacation at the lake, and it's just such a great memory. Lindsay loves to go for walks. We actually do a lot of family walks. Scott and Tim and Dad now here are golfing together and just building memories, just golfing. Lindsay loves the boat. One of her most favorite things every vacation is to get on the boat. So we always rent a boat for her. Well, not just for her, but we make sure she gets on there.
She's my co-pilot, though. She's sitting right next to me while I'm riding.
She will yell, boat, 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 until she gets on that boat. And Ashley, one of the most special things that we started with her when she was 16 is she loves Broadway. So we would go to Broadway shows every year, at least 1 or 2. But since COVID, we haven't been back. But it's changed a little bit. But we have those memories for sure.
All right, so we know we're late on time. Will you guys give us another 10 minutes to hit the last rolling rock?
Yeah.
And that is walking through trials together. We all have to deal with trials in life, but you also have to deal with trials in marriage. And trials can go two ways. It can either erode the foundation, or trials can become foundational building blocks to a stronger and healthier marriage. And it all comes down to how you handle these trials together as a couple. Now, I'll tell you what, with COVID, and the pandemic over the last couple of years, it really has been a huge trial for all of us and the whole world, actually. And it's either brought out the best or the worst in couples, right? Some couples thrived during COVID. There were things about the pandemic that we actually really appreciated. About having a little bit more time together, a lot more time together as a family at home, going for just walks and things of that nature. But for some couples, it was destroying their marriage because they just could not handle the stress of it together, and they weren't functioning, and it brought out so many negative things in their relationship. And so our list of trials, and we're not here to compare trials to what you're dealing with, because some of you are dealing with I don't want to say more difficult trials, just different trials that God has. But we had a premature birth and delivery of our first child, Lindsay. We'll talk just a little bit more about that. Caring for our 3 aging parents was part of, what we had to deal with, and that was not easy. Losing Lisa's mom to cancer, my mom to cancer, and kidney failure. Our dads, her dad with diabetes, my dad with dementia and Alzheimer's. Knee surgeries. We've had multiple knee surgeries. Lisa had double knee replacements just 2 years ago. She had a hip replacement at age 47. I've had multiple knee surgeries. I found out that I was diabetic when I turned 50. I've been fighting that for 7 years. Job and career changes, right? Hurt by people that we trusted. Dealing with church conflicts. Dealing with family members with addictions. That's our list. You've got your own list. We're not here to compare who's got the bigger list or the harder list.
But it's all part of life. It's all part of life.
And for some of you, marriage right now may be your greatest trial, right? So let's look at some scripture that will help us as couples deal with trials.
Yeah, so James 1:2-4 says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when, not if, when troubles come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing." So there is a purpose for our trials. And probably one of the biggest trials of our life, like Scott and I growing up, we didn't have a whole lot of trials until we got married. Probably the deepest trial that we had.
Yeah, the most difficult trial that we've ever been through in our life was definitely the birth of little Lindsay, our first daughter, our first child. She was born 2.5 months premature, weighed 1 pound, 13 ounces at birth.
So here's a little baby that's the size she was when she was born. And she literally fit on my hand. This is 13-inch baby doll. That's how long she was, 13 inches. The only thing difference is this baby has a little bit more fat than Lindsay had. Yeah.
So August 1991 is when she was born, and we almost lost Lisa in childbirth. We almost lost Lindsay in childbirth. She was born tiny, obviously. She was in the NICU at the hospital for 65 days. It was just, to gain an ounce was like, praise God, a miracle, because it's just so slow. And they used to tell us, the doctors would tell us, preemies always catch up, and Lindsay was always off the charts small. Mm-hmm. She did finally come home at about 4 pounds after quite some time.
65 days.
Yeah, 65 days. And then we found out a year later that she had a rare chromosome abnormality, and it didn't have any official name other than they just called it ring 13. What that means is the 13th chromosome in her body. One side of it broke off the ends.
It's supposed to look like the number 11, two strands.
And it ringed up.
And the strand on the left, the ends broke off and it created a circle. So it was a circle and a 1. So they called it ring 13.
So the genetic testing showed this rare abnormality. And when we did some research on it, there was only 70 reported cases in the world. And so it's not like we had a lot of research, like Down syndrome or autism, where so many kids, so many families are impacted by it. There's a lot more research. For us, it was kind of guessing what's going to happen here. But they did have some information. Some of the kids had already passed that had this issue. And some of the kids had certain deformities. Some of them, a lot of them had mental delays or retardation or whatever. They called it retardation back then. They don't call it that now. Mental handicaps. And so we found out little by little that we were going to have to care for her the rest of our life. And she's now 31 years old, and she's amazing. Little Lindsay has deepened all of us in our family. We wouldn't be who we are without her. But I got to tell you, her journey came with multiple surgeries, a hip reconstruction, one of the most painful things that a child can go through, anxiety attacks.
Yeah, and she developed what severe anxiety attacks. So, I mean, she cannot verbally express pain. I mean, think about a pain in your body, gas pain, just that alone, or an itch, or a headache, or a stomach ache, or anything. She can't express that. So the way she let me know she was in pain is she would pull my hair, bite, scratch. So a pretty attack. And her attacks got really bad through high school. And sometimes they would last an hour and a half long, and I'd just have to work her through over and over and over. I'd put her in a hold. I'd take her down to the ground and just hold her. And then I'd say, and then she'd go, Adan. I said, okay, you sure? And so she'd get up, and then we'd go round 2, round 3, round 4, 5, 6, 7, for an hour and a half. And finally she'd go, all done. I'm like, you sure you don't want to go one more round? And she's like, CP. I said, oh, good, because I am CP too. And we did that. I mean, it was rough. It was some rough years where she literally bit a chunk out of my arm one time. I mean, it was really rough. And then God opened up a new education for us in natural health care, which is a whole blessing, and it's been life-changing for us. And that's kind of what I do on my job on this at home. And it has changed everything for us, and she's so much more healthy and happier. And so she doesn't attack nothing like she used to. But there were some tough years. That was all during those years we were caring for Scott's dad and mom and my dad. So it was all, I mean, so it was quite the time, quite the journey.
And as you can tell, Lindsay got to my hair, and yeah, that's why I keep it short like this, you know. But she has been an incredible blessing, and I got to tell you, you know, like,
we would not be who we are
No, we're
without
not.
her. I mean, God knew that we needed her to deepen us.
and we
to
know
grow
this,
us.
that in heaven, she's going to run like she's never been able to run. She's going to talk like she's never been able to talk, and we look forward to that day. But I got to tell you, what the rolling rocks of trials, and you can think about the trials you've gone through, and young couples, maybe you don't have too many yet. Trust me, they're coming. And God brings them into our life. It's like a two-sided coin. The adversary, the devil, wants the trials to destroy you, to cause you to doubt God, to cause you to turn from him, to be angry with him, to question him, of course. And we all, in our humanity, can be there. But the other side of the coin is that God uses the trials to test us, to refine us, to help us become stronger. He never means trials to destroy us, never, but to make us stronger. And one day in heaven, we won't have to deal with these at all. But until then, we are becoming more and more like Jesus as we work through these trials. And in marriage, you know, you're going to either make or break your marriage depending on how you handle them. And so engraved in our wedding bands is this address, this scripture, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And this has become our marriage life verse. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him. And he will direct your path. Do you believe that today? Yeah, many of you could tell your story. We'd love to hear them of how God has done that in your life. But every trial we've gone through, every issue we face, whether in-laws, finances, raising our kids, or trials, trusting God is going to be the key to it all.
So how many of you have a marriage verse? Anybody? Ooh, okay, so this is your homework,
Your homework after this session,
to find a marriage verse. And it has to speak to both of you. You can look through the scripture, pray about it, ask God for a verse for your marriage, and claim it as your marriage verse. Okay, so that's your homework.
okay, let's close our time in prayer. God, thank you once again so much for your constant love and watch care over us. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for these rolling rocks, God, that we all have to deal with. And I just pray for each couple, whether it's in-laws, whether it's finances, God, whether it's trials, whatever it might be, Lord, raising children, that you would just allow these principles, these concepts that you have given us in your word to resonate with us, to guide us and direct us to better relationships. And God, may you just help each couple to continue to grow in their relationship with you. May we learn to trust you more every single day. For we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.